Okay, greetings and welcome to the Gaddy's Pan-African Community News Update. Today's date is the 21st of June, 2026. My name is Brother Dr. Toyin Agbetu, and I'm in the studio with Sister Oleander. Hopefully you're there, Sister Oleander. Can we see you okay? Are you there with us? Oh, no. Ah, there you
Hey,
are.
sorry. Hey, everybody.
Okay.
How's everybody
How's
doing?
everybody doing? It's good to be here. We're running a little late. I suppose it's not late. It's just the time we are. This is the last program for this term. What should I say, really? Happy summer solace for those of you who observe it. I think it was this morning, wasn't it? I think I was awake. It was where we're based in Hackney. It's like 4:10 is when the sun breaks, and I was hoping to get up and go and see the sunset, but my mind was willing, but the body was not. So for those of you who kind of enjoyed the experience, good for you. And also for those brothers out there, happy Father's Day. Hopefully your children
Yes.
are doing that thing that gives you a nice little treat, and remembering the work that it sometimes goes unrewarded just by doing the things we're supposed to do. But
Yes.
like
Happy
I
fun.
said, we're 21st of June, 2026, last edition. As usual, a check-in would be helpful. So if you can see us, if you can hear us okay, Sister Oleander's on the chat, so put some comments in there, greetings, hi, all that sort of stuff. And this is basically a review of the news that's taken place over the last couple of weeks. If you're live, you're also welcome to interact with us, to share, to subscribe, and all that sort of stuff. Well, I'm going to go to our first section, which is our libations, where we remember. And so in this section, thank you, we welcome you to interact, like I said, and this is where we start with libations of those who have recently passed or any notable anniversaries. There's quite a few to go through. What notable anniversaries? So let me start off with the first, which is to Abdul Ibrahim, the globally celebrated jazz pianist, composer, and anti-apartheid activist who joined the ancestors at the age of 91. Now, he's left behind a musical legacy that spans 9 decades and transformed the landscape of South African and international jazz. Now, he was born Adolf Johannes Brand on the 9th of October 1934 in Cape Town. He would later become known as Dollar Brand, and then Abdul Ibrahim, the name that most of us know him as. He was an artist who personified the city's multiculturalism and represented it on the world's stages. He went to school in District 6, which is a municipal inner city area with residents of diverse backgrounds, and due to enforcement of apartheid at that time, it was declared a so-called white area, and this is in 1966, and the community was removed by force in 1982. So this was the creative ambience in which he started to play piano aged 7. Yes, 7 years old when he started playing piano. And this informed how he started to make music. He was what we call a bebop-inspired jazz musician. He had his first musical success in the mid-1950s. He converted to Islam, which is when he became Abdullah Ibrahim in 1968. And his deep religious spirituality was an essential ingredient to his music. He became known as the defiant public intellectual, placing his work within his unique worldviews. And in search of genuine expression through music, he became an icon to the counterworld, to the apartheid regime, taking sides by being and living up to what he was. We remember. Now, the next libation, we paid tribute to singer-songwriter Tellai Riley, who unfortunately joined the ancestors after being stabbed to death, essentially, in East London. Now, his real name, Mark Orabi, was he was 35. He was a Grammy Award winner. He worked on tracks for many artists, including Dua Lipa, Zendaya, Khalid, Flo, and Chipmunk. And as a recognition of his craft and his popularity and his ability, there's been many artists who paid tributes to him, such as Stormzy, Ortsy William, and Wretched 32. He was found by paramedics with stab wounds on the morning of June the 5th, and unfortunately passed away at the scene. We remember. Now, the next libation is one where we reflect on the passing of Prophet Kwame Abubakar, also known as Joe Weatherman, the proprietor of the People's Weatherman Shop. He was well known around Brixton, the Rastafari community, and he was also a reparations activist. In fact, you might have seen him because he was quite prominent in the annual reparation marches. He joined the ancestors this week. I know his face. I don't personally know him, but I've seen him around. And we thank him for his work and his contribution to our community. We remember. Now, the commemorations that we're going to go through, I made allusion to this one in the last program. This is the right time to do it now, because as South Africa marks 50 years since the Soweto uprising, we, just as people in that nation, remember that it was not just another chapter in the history books, nor is its aftermath and legacy something that can just be glossed over. It's an integral part of the history of Azania and, of course, Pan-African movements all over the world. The day of the 16th of June, 1976 began peacefully in Soweto. Student leaders at high schools across the sprawling Johannesburg township, to which the apartheid regime had expelled hundreds of thousands of South Africans, took charge of the morning assemblies. They led their fellow students into the streets and began to march towards Orlando Stadium. Now, the students were protesting against the government's imposition of what they call Afrikaans as a medium of instruction. This is the language that the Boer wanted the African people to speak. Their teachers barely spoke what we call the European minority language, and the students did not want to learn the oppressor's language. They were tired of the intentionally substandard Bantu education system, which tied them down to being second-class citizens in their own land. Now, by the end of the day, dozens would be dead. You see, the mood of the young protesters started off joyous. There was a rally to kind of like push back against the imposition of a language. They marched that winter day. They remembered. They sang songs and anthems, including Senzai Na, which asks in Hausa, "What have we done to deserve this?" But as the children moved east, and it's important to remember this was a young people's uprising, as they moved east, more schools joined. And by the time the first group reached Orlando West, which is where our ancestor Nelson Mandela had lived before he was imprisoned on Robben Island, the students numbered in their thousands. And then they faced a wall of police. The police had a loud hailer. And then, well, this is when the atrocities started to take place. Because what happened was that a police officer, these were Europeans, started to throw tear gas canisters into the crowd. And then dogs were being released to attack the young people. And what happened, we have testimony from students saying that women students were panicked, and then they took stones to retaliate, and that's when the firing started. Helicopters were hovering over, shooting tear gas from up in the sky. Students were panicking, running in different directions. And once the first salute of their life was the 15-year-old Hastings Nabulu and the 12-year-old Hector Peterson. Now, I deliberately didn't include the Hector Peterson this particular year because I tend to show it every year, and it's become the iconic image of that atrocity. But I thought it's also important to remember, if you can see the images on the screen, the one at the top shows the young people gathered at school in a rally, and they had come together and they were happy and they were peaceful and they knew what they were going to do. They weren't there for violence, but the state decided that it was going to attack them. And so the photograph that many of you have seen, taken by the local journalist Sam Nizima, carrying Hector's limp, bloody body, became the day's defining image. We remember Soweto uprising. The next piece of history that we remember is the assassination of our beloved Walter Rodney. Now, on the 13th of June 1980, a bomb secretly concealed in a transmitting set exploded on the lap of Walter Rodney, instantly killing him and seriously injuring his brother. Now, Dr. Walter Anthony Rodney was a noted international scholar who had trained at the University of West Indies. He was born in Guyana on the 23rd of March 1942. He received a scholarship to the UWI, receiving a first-class degree, and proceeded to do his doctoral work at the University of London School of African and Oriental Studies, otherwise known as SOAS. Now, after completing his PhD, he taught in Jamaica and Tanzania before returning to Guyana in 1974. It was then that he wrote his classic book, how Europe underdeveloped Africa, which remains even to this day a classic in colonial and post-colonial politics and economics. His writings on the question of self-mobilization and the emancipation of working peoples had distinguished him in an era when the energies of the people of the Caribbean were directed towards conceptualizing a new society, a new way of being. He was murdered on the 13th of June, 1980. And in the decades after his passing, there were numerous calls for an independent commission of inquiry into his killing, leading to one finally in 2014. Now, after listening to evidence from scores of witnesses, the commission concluded that the Guyanese state itself had been directly involved in Rodney's assassination. It concluded that the government of the then Prime Minister Forbes Burnham had organised the murder, which was perpetrated by an active duty sergeant in the Guyana Defence Force, Gregory Smith. Now, I saw an article, and I want to thank our researchers for sharing this. This article was called "He Paid the Ultimate Price, His Life by Assassination." And in it, it kind of asks the question that when we commemorate the anniversary, there are a few questions that Africans in Guyana can ask themselves today. And I think this applies not just to Africans in Guyana, but Africans all over the world. Where does the country, where does our movement go from here to keep alive the spirit of Rodney's activism? If you haven't read Groundings for My Brother and My Brothers, there's a copy of it in the exhibition at the Barbican. I'll talk about that later. One of the highlights, I love to see that they had that attention to detail. If you haven't read any of his works, and I recommend you do so. But right now, what I want to say is that we remember. And now the next libation and the final libation for this program is, it's Grenfell. 9 years after the Grenfell atrocity, the massacre, I think Corbyn at the time called it social murder. 9 years after that happened, we saw the community gathered to remember and to march in justice just before the building is eventually demolished. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to make it. I think we was actually on air when that final gathering was taking place, because it's on the 14th of every month. Well, not every month, but on the 14th of most months. And I regret not being there. Because the family members, the bereaved, the survivors came together 9 years on to mark its final anniversary. Because what's happened, as you've seen, you can see in the image, the building's been taken down, and this building's been taken down before justice has actually been achieved, before we've received prosecutions putting people in prison for their role in this atrocity. Now, 72 plus people lost their lives in the fire on the 14th of June 2017, and this was said to be caused by an electrical fault on one of the fourth floor flats, which then spread to the building's outside cladding. And it's that cladding which became the narrative that we started to learn about, how human lives were seen to be secondary to the aesthetics of a building for the richer residents in that borough. Now, the gathering that took place last week comes after police and prosecutors announced that up to 20 companies and 57 individuals could face criminal charges over the blaze. Now, decisions will be made on whether any charges will be brought before next year's 10th anniversary. That's still too long, but that's the assurance the Metropolitan Police have given. The potential offences, they've said, are under consideration, or the potential offences, they said, are under consideration include corporate gross negligence, manslaughter, fraud, health and safety breaches, and misconduct in public office. I don't know if you can see the image. Let me just see if I can do that. But you can see that the tower is much smaller in that image now, because the Labour government decided to bring it down, to keep lowering the size of the tower, which some residents talk about as two funeral sites for their beloveds. And there was a strong argument that they didn't want Grenfell coming down until justice had been achieved. But it is coming down, and by this time next year, it won't be there. And there'll be some kind of memorial. We can only hope that the Metropolitan Police keeps up to their part of the bargain where they say that the charges will be brought before the 10th anniversary. We're watching the mark in the time now, literally 12 months from now. We'll see what happens, because that will be 10 years since the atrocity. I'm going to leave it there and just say we remember. Okay, you are watching Legality's Pan-African Community News Update. If you are with us live, you're welcome to interact with us through Facebook, YouTube, excuse me. Please don't forget to subscribe, like, and share if you find this broadcast useful. This is the last one for this term, so we won't be back until a couple of months. So, if you have something you want to say, Sister Oleander's, watching the chat, please make a comment, please share, please talk to each other. We are a community. I want to talk about also at some stage some kind of ideas about how to invigorate the program. I'm thinking about having polls or maybe having guests on, but if I have guests on, it makes the program longer. So I'm curious about your views about how we do this. But right now I'm going to continue going through the news because I know that we started an hour later than our normal scheduled time. And this section looks at the general domestic news affecting our community over the past 2 weeks. I'm going to start off with, we've been covering this one for the years now. And this is the Windrush compensation scheme. It's important to say compensation scheme because it's not a reparative scheme. And we're now in a situation where the Prime Minister, I don't know how long he's going to be Prime Minister, but the current Prime Minister and current Home Secretary have been urged to remove the Windrush compensation scheme from the control of the Home Office. Now, this is quite a seismic change. We've been asking for a long time here at Legali, but over 70 public figures have signed an open letter backing a call for the Windrush Justice Community Collective, they call themselves WJCC, for a radical overhaul of the scheme, which was set up to compensate those mainly African Caribbean, people who were wrongly classified as illegal migrants and stripped of citizenship rights over decades. Now, the narrative that people put out there is that it's only Africans with Caribbean heritage, which is not true. Essentially, most migrants with Commonwealth backgrounds, what they call Commonwealth, that the first term, are also affected by this. But the narrative has been, of course, because it's called the Windrush, to limit it to only Africans with Caribbean heritage. But the problem is that even with that, it's not been effective. With many people of our elders joining the ancestors before their claims have even been processed, if they're being processed at that. We've covered this extensively in the past. I'm not going to go through so much of that, but I will tell you about this collective who put this together, this open letter. And their members include Age UK, the Black Equity Organisation, of course, Black Lives Matter UK, the Runnymede Trust, the Suffolk Law Centre, and the Windrush Justice Clinic. And they're the ones who are calling for this scheme to be placed under an independent body overseen by a judge or commissioner. I'm not sure I'll be happy with those two in place, but I get the point. It's also calling for a statutory public inquiry and the non-means tested free legal help for Windrush scandal claimants and for survivors to be given their preference of citizenship or indefinite leave to remain. And these are very reasonable requests of public inquiry because this scandal has been a tragedy after tragedy. So you not only have the original sin of the harm caused, but been compounded by this process. Like I said, people have joined the ancestors before their claims are finished. And I think we spoke in the last program about how people have not been given legal aid and they've been turned down straight away. And then when they finally get legal assistance, they've been given reasonable payouts. Now, this particular month, the Independent Windrush Commissioner, Clive Foster, told MPs that survivors of the scandal should be given legal support to reduce the number of claimants denied payouts and bring the scheme in line with other state compensation programs. Now, this, of course, is exactly what we were referring to last week, which is true. There's a lot of controversy around Clive Foster, whether he's been a hindrance or he's been of a help. But this is actually a good statement he's making. But I think those who pay, what's that saying? The one who pays the tune plays. I can never remember these proverbs. He's on the government payroll, unfortunately, and this means that his independence will be compromised. That's what I believe, anyway. Anyway, the open letter calls for a complete reset of the redress scheme, saying the denial of free legal support to Windrush survivors, unlike victims of the post office horizon and infected blood scandals, has meant more than half have been awarded nothing. And that's very interesting because if you look at the comparison between other such scandals that haven't affected our community, then you'll see that the Justice Department in the UK, I don't really like calling it justice, the criminal justice system, has actually acted differently. It has freed up its money, it's freed up support to make sure that they're being, if not compensated, actually on the road towards reparation. That's not happening in this particular case, despite all the lovely words that comes out of these politicians' mouth. In fact, one of the things I found quite interesting this weekend was that I was looking through my inbox and there was a post from the veteran activist Lee Jasper, and he's actually arguing he's not going to celebrate Windrush Day, which I found quite interesting. He makes a really powerful case for why he won't celebrate Windrush Day, but only commemorate it. And I think that's the right position. There is nothing to celebrate. And we're going to talk more about this shenanigans with Windrush and the term and the logo a bit later on in the program. But his argument that actually there's nothing to celebrate when they're just kind of waiting for our ancestors to die, when they're treating them so disgustingly, but we can commemorate it because it is a scandal. It's the Home Office's scandal, not our scandal. Anyway, I'll leave it there. There's a load of people who signed the open letter. You can see their names there and online, but I'm going to move on. Okay, so a couple of days ago, it was World Sickle Cell Day. That's the 19th of June. And I found it really interesting that I found on the same day there was an article on a BBC website about the sister Rita Ramos, who has a blood transfusion treatment every 6 months at Nottingham City Hospital, and how she's actually supporting calls for people to actually engage in donating their blood to help those of us with sickle cell. And I think it's a lovely campaign that she's leading. And the reason why I find it quite interesting is because it's also, even though World Sickle Cell Day is mandated by the United Nations, it's also kind of part of this time it's also part of what they call the World Blood Donor Day. And it does make me think that, is it more useful to call for World Blood Donor Day because it seems like it's got nothing to do with African people, than actually tell people to focus on World Sickle Cell Day? Because I saw there were some really great events for World Sickle Cell Day. I saw, there's a couple of organizations, my brain's gone blank. I saw some of the Eventbrite exhibitions that they were putting on. And I think Sister Oleander went to an event in the park, and people kind of like trying to raise awareness there. But it's kind of like not enough just for us to be doing this. This needs everyone in the nation. There's 60, no, I say 60, there's almost 80 million people in the UK. And there's something quite annoying that, we don't get the attention, we don't get the resources, we don't get the support that other disorders receive. So, if this was cancer, raising awareness would be on television for free of charge, it'll be on the radio, it'll be in the newspapers, it'll be on billboards. But because it's not, because it's a condition that affects primarily people of African heritage, even though it's actually one of the world's, or the UK's at least, largest growing blood disorders, people don't see it as something that bothers them. So anyway, this is just bringing this story to light. It's World Sickle Cell Day, and we want to thank a sister again for joining this campaign to raise awareness, and all the people who did so over the last few days. Okay, the next few stories are a bit harrowing. I'm not going to go through all the details. This is a news broadcast. I have to do these kind of things. This is the story of Sarah Nagba, the mother from Telford, who fractured her 7-week-old skull, causing injuries which contributed to her death more than 2 years later. Well, the reason why I'm talking about it today is because she's been jailed for life. The sister Nagba, who is 32 years of age, accepted that she caused dreadful life-shortening and life-limiting head injuries to Eliza Nagba. She's denied murder, but claimed she was instead guilty of infanticide. Now, she was sentenced to a minimum of 19 years, which was reduced to 12 years to reflect the time spent in custody to date. And she was charged with murder after Eliza died after age 2 in August 2022. And this was from a respiratory infection. Now, this is after having been left vulnerable by the assault in November 2019. So you've got to think about the time frame that this poor child has been living. I mean, under. It's like she fractured her skull when she was 7 weeks old. Her injuries were caused by forceful shaking, together with a very significant impact to the head, causing a complex skull fracture. Now, when the judge was sentencing her, he said, "You brutally assaulted her on the 13th of November 2019, when she was just 7 weeks old. At times, she experienced 3 or 4 seizures each day. You inflicted catastrophic injuries on defenseless baby and did everything you could to avoid responsibility for what you'd done." It's a horrific story. Justice, you can never bring back. I mean, what can we do? You can't bring back the child. It's a horrible story. Eliza deserved a life like everyone else. But yeah, we're just reporting the news. Unfortunately, the next story isn't much better. This is one where a former children's nursery assistant and her partner have been sentenced for killing their 8-month-old son, Devon Rose Turner. Now, he lived with his parents in Bedfordshire. He passed away in December 2021 after suffering a catalogue of injuries. His father, Emmanuel Turner, 33, was jailed for 22 years after being found guilty of murder, while the mother, Shandy Rose, 29, was sentenced to 12 years after being convicted of manslaughter. Again, I've talked about some of these cases. I don't really like going through them. The judge, when sentencing, said you both knew about his pain, but both of you decided to keep it hidden, so he received no medical help. Bedfordshire Police described the case as complex and deeply challenging. Devon Rose Taylor suffered more than 80 separate injuries during the 8 weeks leading up to his death. 80. Emergency services were called to the family home after Turner reported his son was not breathing. He was taken to hospital, but joined the ancestors December 2021. Now, they were arrested on suspicion of murder in 2022. They were then released under investigation. In August 2022, the officers learned that Rose, who used to work at a nursery in London, and Turner, who travelled to Nigeria. Despite the ongoing investigation, that came to an end when they were eventually arrested by officers at the airport and charged when they returned to the UK in May last year. Yeah. And the last story for this section, and we spoke about this last week, so I'm not going to go over it all in detail. You may remember the story of Janice Nix. Well, she had finally now been sentenced to 12 years imprisonment on the 19th of June after she previously convicted of killing a 5-year-old girl nearly 5 decades ago after a fatal bath incident following a trial at Isleworth Crown Court. If you want to remember what happened, it's in the last program. I'm not going to go through those details again. For decades, her death was treated, Andrew's death, young Andrew's death, was treated as a tragic accident. However, after her older brother reported the incident to the police in September 2022, the police re-examined what happened. It's also important to note that in the same trial, Nix was also found guilty of child cruelty in connection to her sustained ill treatment towards Andrew's older brother, who was 8 years old at the time of his sister's death. Now, if you've got access to the BBC iPlayer, you can see a short interview with him on BBC London, where he talks about, what he lived with, knowing his mother had done that and had threatened him not to talk to the police, and how he felt as a child and growing up into a young adult, not a young adult anymore, into an adult now. But yeah, I don't even like saying the word justice has been served, because it hasn't. Andrew's not coming back, but at least Nix was having to atone for her sins. Okay, you are watching the Galleys Pan African Community News Update. It makes my throat dry when I talk about things like that. If you're watching live, you are welcome to interact with us through Facebook, YouTube, or Twitter. Not Twitter. When I say Twitter, we don't use Twitter anymore. I've got to stop saying that. That madman, the musky one, is the white supremacist chief. I mean, they're all bad, but he's one of the worst. Anyway, if you're here with us, you can subscribe, like, share. Sister Oleander's on the chat, so you can send messages to each other. got something you want to say, let her know, she'll let me know, blah, 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 blah. But the next section is a review of politics around the UK from over the past 2 weeks. So let me begin with the first bit of foolishness. And that comes from Conservative leader Kemi Badenoch. Yes, once again, she's opened her mouth and said nonsense. This time that her party is going to scrap the rules requiring public bodies such as schools and hospitals to promote equality when making decisions. Sounds crazy, yeah, but that's what she's decided, because she's argued that Britain took a wrong turn after the Macpherson report into the racist killing of Stephen Lawrence, and said that it didn't matter how many young African boys were being stopped and searched by the police. In fact, she thinks that they should be increased to stopping and searching. She said that her party would abolish what we call the public sector equality duty for teachers, nurses, and police officers to consider protected characteristics such as ethnicity or racialized identity enshrined in equality law as they undertake their day-to-day jobs. And I can't stress out how ridiculous this is, that we have an African woman saying that, we want, when people are doing their day-to-day job, not to think about making sure that they are not discriminating against people based on their ethnicity or engaging in racism. She says, don't worry about that. Just do your job. If you're racist, you're racist. Just do your job. It doesn't work. She's gone even further, and I'm not going to read everything she said. She claims that the Nottingham stabbings, the Southport attack, the Manchester arena bombing could have been stopped if public authorities did not fear being called racist and did more racial profiling. It's outrageous. She's got this silly statement saying that public institutions have spent so long about institutional racism that they've become institutionally incompetent. Well, I think that's the pot calling the kettle black. It's outrageous that she would argue that efforts to address institutional racism is actually racist, and that people shouldn't be anti-racist in their day-to-day operations. But this is the Conservative Party, and this is what they are. They always have been. A party is more honest about its white supremacist ideals and values is that of reform. And its leader, Nigel Farage, has said that his party would ban what they call foreign nationals from living in social housing, with tenants required to find private accommodation within 3 months or face possible deportation. I can't even stress how outrageous this is. The party confirmed the ban would apply retrospectively, regardless of how long someone has been living in the UK, under Reform's policy of abolishing indefinite leave to remain. So this means that you and I, if we need to live, or I was born in the UK, but it's if I suppose even us, we're born in the UK, or if a family member comes and lives with us and they've been with us for like 20, 30 years, if they end up living in social housing, then they will be forced to find private accommodation or deported. These are explicitly racist arguments. Now, don't take my word for it. Just read his Substack essay. If I don't read it, I'll just hurt your eyes, where he says that anti-white racism was embedded into the state, and that legislation aimed at equality was a form of social cleansing. And so this is the same kind of rhetoric that Kemi Badenoch is saying. Now, what's interesting is that a government spokesperson, this is someone for Labour, said that illegal immigrants, asylum seekers, and migrants on student or work visas are not eligible for social housing. Well, yes, we know that if they're illegal, we know that there are conditions. That means they can't just jump on a social housing ladder. But it's quite interesting how the Labour Party has decided, rather than pushing back on the ethical value, saying, no, we're already doing the bad stuff. They tell us that nearly 9 in 10 social homes go to UK nationals, and most councils have enough tough local connection rules in place to ensure housing goes to people who need it the most. And so they go on and on. It's important to remember that the Reform leaders discredited Great Replacement claim that European people will become a minority in the UK can be traced back to the heart of the eugenics movement. And I'll talk about that, because that's what this is really about. Kind of like take housing away from foreign nationals before they replace us. That's where this is coming from. But we'll come back to that. Now, one story which has been a little bit torn. I had to report it because, as you know how we are as an organisation, and myself as a scholar activist, I don't shy away from difficult stories. This is one about Sierra Leone's First Lady, Fatima Jabi-Bio. Now, she has kept a two-bedroom council flat in Walworth after her husband was elected president. But now the property has been taken back by the council to give to another family, which the council is saying is genuinely in need. And it sounds like, well, why not? You know, she's relocated to Sierra Leone. She's in the presidential lodge in Freetown. You know, it's reported to have a swimming pool, a tennis court. You know, she's been, you know, her husband, Julius Madabeo, has been president since 2018. But it looks like her family, her children, who are all British citizens, are actually living in the UK, and she's paying for the council house herself. She hasn't committed any crimes, is what she's saying. But of course, there's like thousands of people on the waiting list, and the council has just said, no, you have significant wealth. I don't know. I don't assume because someone married someone who became president that they automatically have wealth, but that's what they're assuming. And so therefore they've reclaimed the home. So it's an interesting story. It's one that I would normally be, yes, this is good. We can't have corruption and blah, 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 blah. But yeah, without more details, I'm not so sure. They also used, what I didn't like about council, they used an African officer to lead this charge against her, so they couldn't be accused of being racist. I'm guessing that was the rationale behind it. But I don't know. I don't know her. I don't know her husband. I don't know politics. I don't know Waldsworth Council. But I'm just sharing the news. Okay, and I thought, being today, there's a lot of talk about Andy Burnham. I don't know if you know, Andy Burnham is Labour's new hope. He won his election in Macclesfield, and he's now looking to be the new prime minister. And Keir Starmer's actually said that he's, well, it looks like Keir Starmer's actually going to step down tomorrow. He's going to step down tomorrow. He's going to set a timetable for him to leave. And I thought it might be a good idea to remember exactly who Keir Starmer is and what the Labour Party is, because the Prime Minister was a former human rights lawyer, and he was also responsible for this statement that he made about England becoming, or the UK becoming, an island of strangers, where he drew directly from the rhetoric of Enoch Powell. And so what you're hearing right now is that a Labour Party that's very much saying, well, we all like Keir, he's a decent bloke, but he can't get up with the public, and it's time for change and stuff like this. Well, that narrative that he's a decent bloke, he's a hardworking guy, we have to challenge that. He's not a decent bloke if he's channeling Enoch Powell. He's not a decent bloke if his legacy is one of supporting genocide. So I just wanted to put that out there by his own metric, his own words, his own actions. And I know him, I've dealt with him personally at Free Legali when he blocked our investigation to get the war criminals in the British Army who had tortured Kenyans during colonialism in a court for justice. So I will never forgive him for his work in blocking our work. But anyway, just a reminder that it was only last year that he was saying this nonsense. Not a decent bloke. Okay, the last story for this section was one that came off, I think it was LBC, one of their platforms. Strange story. It's a strange story, but I thought it was worth sharing because it's about the model and activist Sabrina Dowie-Elba. And the radio is up in arms because she said that a driver who hit her car, and then when she went to ask him what's going on and stuff like that, that the driver kept on saying, where are you from? No, yeah, but where are you from? She was asking her, where are you from? And she was like, what's that got to do with anything? You backed into my car. I wasn't even moving. And she was really upset. And so, the right-wing papers are saying that, our sister is enraged and it's allegedly racist. Well, actually, no, because this 36-year-old who you might know from her marriage to Idris Elba in 2019 said that this kind of where are you from shows how people feel increasingly comfortable treating what she defines as black and brown people as conditional citizens. And I think she's got a really good point here, that someone can do something wrong and then casually say, where are you from? No, where are you really from? And shift the narrative. So this is what happened to her. She said the woman backed into her park card and tried to change the terms of the interaction. She very quickly asked me, where are you from? Keeping in mind that the woman backed into my park car. And when she said Canadian, she then asked again. It wasn't enough. And she says that I think a lot of people know what that question means when they're asked in a particular tone. Now, Sabrina, who's lived in London with Idris for their entire 9-year relationship, pointed out that racism isn't always theatrical. And I think that's a very powerful line. She says, sometimes it works by redirecting conversations because you ask for accountability and suddenly my presence became the issue. So you've done something wrong. I'm asking for accountability. And all of a sudden it's like, well, who are you to ask me? That becomes how everything is reframed. And so this is why I decided to share this story, because it's a very interesting and astute observation to make. She said it was vital to discuss the exchange in the context of the country's current climate, where political parties have spent years debating who belongs and who is considered too foreign. She says people feel entitled to interrogate you. I think it's a very good point. Yeah, anyway, let's move on. That's that last section. Okay, you're watching the Galleys Pan-African Community News Update. Blah, blah, blah. Twitter, blah, blah. Not Twitter. Toyin, stop it. Facebook, YouTube. I suppose we should try. What's that one of the young people? Instagram. I know, but it's got to be. I can't be bothered. Yeah. Yeah, you can interact with us if you want to. You can subscribe, like, share. Sister Oleander's on the chats. If you've got something you want to say, please, feel free to talk on there. Chat amongst yourselves. It all becomes part of a living archive, and that's really important. The next section is review of policing from around the UK, and basically looking at stuff that's taken place over the last 2 weeks. And I'm going to start off with an update on a story. This is one about Noah Donahoe's disappearance and subsequent passing. There's been no evidence of any third-party involvement. This is what an inquest has heard. His body was found in an underground water tunnel 6 days after he disappeared at Northwood Road at the end of a bicycle ride across the city from his home in South Belfast. Now, what we know now is that he left his home at around 1740 and was last seen around 1800. Now, Detective Chief Superintendent Tom Phillips, a mouthful, the cop, Tom Phillips, has been given evidence at the inquest. And he said, he's the senior witness. He worked for the PSNI, which is the Police Service of Northern Ireland. He said that, that there was no plausible or reliable evidence to suggest there'd been any interaction with a third party. And this is basically because when this story came up, there was a lot of Africans disappearing, and there was a lot of suspicion, which I think is still out there and still justified, that when our people go vanish and when they go missing and stuff, the focus on trying to find them, the concern over their well-being seems quite muted. And in this particular case, I think that this narrative came up. So this hearing is saying that, well, look, the police have looked into it. They've arrived at this conclusion. They acknowledge that there were some mistakes, or he says failings, during the investigation. But he says that the detectives working on the case were not incompetent, and the failings were human error. They weren't deliberate. And when the CID took over controlling the investigation, you see, it was not because people weren't doing their jobs. It's it's really just to kind of get better control over everything. So this, like I said, it's an update on the inquest. We still don't know why Noah joined the ancestors, and yeah, it's not much more I can say on that. The next story is one about Jonathan Eldred, a former Metropolitan Police officer who served more than 20 years on the beat. And he's been found guilty of gross misconduct. And I said he was a former Metropolitan Police officer, but what we now know is that he would have been dismissed had he been still serving. That's quite frustrating when they do this, because when they retire, they can, there's no repercussions. I mean, he's been put on a list now, so he's banned from ever becoming a police officer in the future. But because he's retired, we can only retrospectively look at his racist and Islamophobic posts on X. I think he did it when it was then called Twitter in 2025. Now, during what they call an accelerated misconduct hearing, which is a process used in cases where there's considered to be sufficient evidence of gross misconduct, and where it being a public interest for an officer to leave the force without delay, the police found that, yes, there was cause for him to be dismissed. I'm not going to go through all the things that he said. You can see some of the images on the screen. One of them was an AI-generated video which showed a baby speaking to camera under the headline "Labour Out," and they use this AI stuff to kind of parrot racist rhetoric, racist lines, Islamophobic lines. So there's no one there physically seeing it, but it's a computer-generated imagery that's saying the things that they don't want to be caught out saying. He was a police officer who did this. Now he says that he is remorseful. He's remorseful of making these posts or supporting them, etc. No consequences. I think what worries me the most is that he served on the police force for 20 years. And I worry about the influence he's had on so many cadets and officers and how long that culture was tolerated. This is not just an aberration, a one-off. He served on the force for 20 years and he was able to retire before this misconduct hearing was made. That really bothers me. Anyway, the next story is one that I received an email from a group called the Sons of Malcolm, and they've reported how they've seen almost a half a dozen uniformed police officers on the Brighton seafront, and just kind of hanging and watching racialized people at spots where teenagers gather. Now, there's not much more I can say on this. They're arguing, is it normal for uniformed officers in marked police cars to be parked in the exact same spot where youths gather, which seems to be a practice that's taking place in Brighton quite often. They just park the car and they hang around and stare. You can see in the shot, there's like 6 of them just staring at this group of young people. Now, they're saying that the youth were looking down, seeming pensive as whether to even walk down or not. And I can understand that. They're thinking like, well, hold on, maybe we shouldn't go down on the beach while those officers are there. I don't know much more about this story. That's all we have. It came to us in a digest, but I thought I would share it. The next story, oh God, that ugly mug. Sorry, unprofessional of me. A cross-party committee of MPs has concluded that David Lammy's jury trial reform plan for the criminal courts in England and Wales could have far-reaching impact on race relations. Now, as you know, Lammy is now the Deputy Prime Minister, probably for the next 5 minutes, because if Berman does come in very soon, I'm pretty sure he's not going to keep Lammy, who's been kind of like a lapdog to Starmer, in his team. But, his decision to remove the right to elect for a Crown Court trial has been said to have the potential to increase mistrust in the criminal justice system amongst the African heritage community. Now, I tried to download the Criminal Select Committee report. Well, I did download it. I tried to read it. It's quite dense, and trying to find a significant point, you have to go right through to around page 58. It's around 120 pages long. I'll have to read it another time, but I did scan it and found a few things interesting, and I'll talk about that in a sec. But the report was released on this Wednesday, and it called for the government to use a clear national target for the number of African heritage members of the senior judiciary, after shocking figures showed that only 1% of Crown Court judges were of African heritage. And this is, an ongoing problem. So it's not only, judges are kind of like disproportionately European, which kind of gets this idea about two-tier police, it just does my head in. But also now, the judges, and now we have, they're saying we won't have no recourse to a jury. And this is interesting is that the MPs also referred to Lammy's own review, written in 2017, when he was a backbench Labour MP, which concluded that juries are one of the few areas of the criminal justice system where people from minority ethnic backgrounds do not face disproportionate outcomes. So he's aware that juries help people from minority ethnic backgrounds. He wrote that, he concluded that in his own report. But, I could go into all the details, but I won't. What I'll just say is that there's been some research by Professor Cheryl Thomas, KC, which concluded both in 2010 and 2017 that unlike all other stages in the criminal justice process in England and Wales, the one stage where members of, they use the term BAME groups appear to not be treated disproportionately is when a jury made up members of the public reaches a verdict by deliberation. And I think that's just common sense. If you have people that represent, your peers and those around you, and they're not so tied to the political agenda of the day, then they're more likely to be able to see when a miscarriage of injustice could occur, or when police officers have acted out of virus, when they're abusing their powers, and to prevent harm from taking place in the criminal justice system. It's a criminal legal system. It's not a justice system. Anyway, that's the story. The last story for this section, I did consider trying to find a way to show the video, and I'm glad I didn't actually, because I don't think I want to watch it again so soon. This is a story of Abdul Latif Ajibika, who was just 17 years old when he was tasered twice by Metropolitan Police firearms officers in a chip shop in East London. Now, if you've got a chance, go onto the More 4 website and you can watch his interview. It's a short piece, I think it's around 8 minutes long, and it explains the story and he gives his testimony. But he was left bleeding, bruised, and unable to leave the house or go to school. He's essentially traumatized. And what Channel 4 did by analysing the CCTV footage, the phone footage filmed by eyewitnesses and police call logs, they showed how his wrongful detainment had officers violently apprehended, despite having information that the suspect they were looking for had already left the area. So they didn't need to do this. They had evidence saying that the guy wasn't there. But they were charged up, they were ready to go, they wanted to do something on that night. And so he went into a chip shop, 17-year-old young boy, and they abused him. They violently abused him. And if you watch the video, it breaks your heart. I mean, I almost went into tears. I mean, it was just heart-wrenching, because sometimes we talk about statistics and we forget about the impact on the lives of those who are affected by this savagery, this police brutality. And this is, of course, not to say that all police officers are bad. It's not to say that police officers don't also go through similar concerns and get stress and PTSD from some of the things that they're involved in. But I'm just saying that in situations like now, when it's like this one, where it's clear that he was not the suspect had gone, and yet they continued, and you have 9 officers and one 17-year-old boy, they could have killed him. But what they've done is that they've traumatized him for life. It's horrific. And this is all coming in the same year. You got to remember that there was a report by the Children's Commissioner that found children of African heritage are 5 times more likely to have force used against them than their European counterparts. So as a parent, that terrifies me. And that my children goes out and they completely just going to the chip shop and they could be tasered and traumatized for the rest of their life. Now, in this particular case, the IOPC, the Independent Office for Police Conduct, said that officers failed to obtain a sufficient description of the suspect before stopping him. The Metropolitan Police, defending its officers, said that officers don't have the benefit of hindsight, and the public would expect them to treat every situation as if they were dealing with genuine armed threat. But a complaint that went into their approach said that they did not find the use of force was excessive, or that there was racial discrimination. And I think that's why we can't have justice. We can't have faith and confidence in these institutions, because if a 17-year-old child, a teenager, can who evidence says wasn't the suspect already left, goes to the shops, and you have 9 officers taser him and then jump on him, and if you get a chance, if you can stomach it, watch the video. Like I said, it's on Channel 4. His name is Abdul Latif Ajibika. It comes up, but be prepared. It doesn't. Be prepared if you want to watch it, but just be aware that this is what's taking place on the streets of London, and this is not Nigel Farage's lot. This is Keir Starmer's lot. What's his name? I forgot the commissioner's name now. I can't believe Mark Rowney, their lot. And both of them, funny enough, are sirs. You seem to get rewarded in the British establishment when you're willing to engage in violence and genocide. You tend to kind of like move up the ranks and get bigger and grander, more titles. Okay, so last one for next section. You are watching Legality's Pan-African Community News Update. You can interact, blah, 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 chat, Sister Oleander. It's quite quiet. I'm suspecting, okay, maybe you can hear us, maybe because we're late. Maybe it's such a hot day and everyone's just asleep. I don't know. But I hope it's useful. I hope I'm not traumatizing you. I'll keep moving on. And I hope I'm not here talking to myself. If I'm talking here to myself, it's recorded. It goes onto YouTube. It goes onto Facebook. You can watch it another time. So I'm going to keep moving on. This next section is a review of the expressions of white supremacy and violent Afrophobia in the UK, around the UK over the last fortnight. Okay, and so let's start off with the big story, which if we were online talking about this news stuff every day, this would have been covered over the last 7 days, every single day, because what we saw was groups of young people masked and dressed in black balaclavas, burning bins in the streets of North Belfast. And this was basically a pogrom. They were hunting down people who were of African, Asian heritage, anyone who they felt was non-European, anyone who was a Muslim, anyone that was an African, and burning their houses, burning their cars. And these same scenes were being played out not just in in Belfast, but all across Northern Ireland, where anti-immigration protests were being held. Now, of course, it's very important to understand that some of these anti-immigration protests were technically peaceful, but others were kind of like run by people that were hell-bent on violence and destruction. Now, I found testimony from a woman who was shouting through the letterbox of a house with smashed windows, and she says that she was trapped inside of her friends. They were terrified. The house behind them was on fire. This was, I mean, I was getting emails from people who I know who live in the area. They were petrified. Everyone was like, don't go out, don't go out. They're hunting down streets, don't have any flags in your window. It was outrageous. It was the most scary, terrifying thing ever. Another group of African women in the region was led to safety. They collapsed in the arms of firefighters because they didn't know if they would ever get out alive. Now, Pastor Jack McGee, who lives in one of the areas, said that, look, these Africans are good Christian people. They're being put out because they are black, to use their term. That's what's going on. This isn't Islamophobia. This isn't some religious persecution. This is a straight out race hate. This is racism. Yeah, this is what's taking place. This was just last week. I talk about Ireland, but same thing happened in Glasgow. It's got to such a state that even the Police Scotland's Assistant Chief Constable Alan Waddell said that people in Glasgow had been attacked because of the colour of their skin. This is straight out racism. Now, the disorder followed. Now, I don't know if you remember the story of Hadi Alodid from Sudan, who was charged with the attempted murder of Stephen Ogilvie in Belfast, and it's a horrific crime. You know, Ogilvie lost his left eye and suffered damage on his right eye, as well as injuries to his back and his neck in this assault. But what happened was that the assaults, the demonstrations, the protests that came up afterwards, which were turbocharged by the Farages, by the Elon Musk of this world, by the Stephen Yaxis of this world, they widely promoted by these. I don't like using the term far right. They're not far right. They're mainstream. These characters. So hundreds, if not thousands, of people wearing balaclavas and face coverings and marching through the city in Glasgow, confronting the police, causing all kinds of havoc. This is all last week. Anyway. Now, this normally goes into the politics section, but we have to understand kind of like this isn't just happening out of nowhere. What's happened over the last, I'd say for almost a decade. I mean, as long as I've been alive, there's always been challenges with immigration. There's always been topic, but it's taken an ugly turn since the whole Brexit thing. We've had people like Farage release an essay saying that the British state has turned against its own white population as a result of the immigration policies of successive governments. And he actually writes that white Brits will become a minority in this country before the end of the century. Make no mistake, if there's no urgent action taken to remove discriminatory and dangerous anti-white policies, we will see another Belfast. So he saw the riots take place. He saw African people being hounded out of their homes. He saw violent thugs burning cars, stopping cars, dragging people out. He saw all this stuff. And this is what he decided to post. He's the one who called for rage. He's the one who calls for this. He's not alone. I'm using Farage because he's a member of parliament. Right? So you'd think a member of parliament would have some kind of protocol. There'd be some way to say, you know what, you've gone beyond what's those principles that they call them? The Nolan principles. That you've violated the Nolan principles. You've brought the house into disrepute. Kick him out. But they're all flipping cowards. None of them will challenge him. None of them will. They'll say little statements, but none of them will just go all the way and kick him out. And so he's saying these comments. He's putting these stupid images online, and you can see this image which is saying that by 2011 or 2100 or whatever it is, that the UK is going to be completely swamped by non-Europeans. This is the kind of nonsense. So this is all eugenics racist, and it comes from his supporters like Matt Godwin, who lost his attempt to become a member of parliament. He was beaten by the Green Party candidate, who was much better. She did a great job. But this guy, he works with that guy, what's his name, Goodwin, who's a co-founder of Migration Watch. And Migration Watch for the last, decade or so has been slowly poisoning public discourse with his nonsense about the migrant takeover. So it's part of the French philosopher, I won't say philosopher, that's too rich word, Le Monde's kind of like statement about the Great Replacement, mixed up with eugenics. And I say eugenics, and I'm not imagining this because Coleman, the guy who works with Goodwin, and Goodwin is part of Reform, was an active participant in Britain's organised eugenics movement. Actually, he was the trustee of the Galton Institute, which was renamed Eugenics Society. I wouldn't be surprised if both of them were actually planning to attend, or if they did attend the session that took place at UCL before we found out and stopped those things from happening. So again, this white minority kind of like rhetoric is being turbocharged at the highest levels of British politics, and it's also being turbocharged at the lowest level. The lowest level is what I would call the GB News rubbish, where you have now someone in office.
Sorry, Toyin.
Michael Grade saying that actually,
Toyin.
They're saying things that we need to be said because the white liberal elite have taken over the BBC and everything like that. And Ofcom's supposed to be a neutral regulator. Just Oleander, all right.
Yeah, sorry. There's a few comments. I'm just going to read them quickly. It's a few slides back. It's just I didn't want to stop your flow. So one is from, sorry, where's it gone? Aseptica 1, Port Abdullah, Steve. Oh dear, this is terrible news. I didn't hear about this. I'll watch this. That's one. And then another one, MO8162. Thank you for the info. You're not talking to yourself, but I thought your broadcast would be earlier. I'm very concerned we're not prepared after the Belfast racist riots.
Thank you. I mean, those are really good points. I mean, the first one, if you're going to watch the Channel 4 footage, it's important to watch to understand what's happening and what can happen and what does happen. They knew it wasn't him. Well, I can't say they knew it wasn't him. They knew that the suspect had gone, and they still went ahead and did it anyway. So I don't know how that can mean anything else but discriminatory, because they just saw someone who looked like it was African, so he might have been him, and they decided, let's just take him into custody, and they used a full force against him. I don't believe that they thought he was a threat to them. He didn't pose a threat to them. So if you watch it, what will break your heart, however, is him trying to be positive about the encounter which happened a couple of years ago, and you understanding that it scarred him, it's traumatized him. The second thing is just apologies for being late. The program is normally at 6 and we started after 7. That's my fault. Like I said, I tried to stay up for for solstice, and I thought, like I said, I'd get out. So it was 4:10. I was just too tired, and so my routine was wrong. And I know I glib over these stories, but I tend to read everything before I come on air. So I know the stories during the weeks, but I refresh my memory on them as well, and that takes a little bit of time. And there was some extra stories. We got some amazing researchers who share stories with us, and we compile them. And that means having to go through them, get the images and stuff like that. and I just couldn't get it done in time. I literally couldn't get it done in time. So we're here now. But the question you mentioned about us not being ready, I think is a really important one. It's causing me concern that we're being told time. Remember, last year was the first race riots or the racist riots across the UK. I mean, not the first, obviously, in the history of the UK, but it was the first round of Yaxley's kind of like United Kingdom and stuff. And we seem to have forgotten that, and it's happened again this year. And they're dragging people from the streets again, and they're burning houses and cars again. And so there's something that says that we need to be organised, and I don't think we are. I think we keep thinking that it will blow over. I don't think we're that. I think things are going to have to get very, very ugly before they get better again. And I would rather, as a community, that we were organised in a way that we knew how to protect ourselves, that we had contingencies to make sure that we look after those who are at risk. I see the racists, whenever one of them get prosecuted, they go onto these crowdsourcing funds, and they raise millions of pounds to protect and get legal defences for some of the most horrendous people in society. And I don't see us organised. I'm not saying the answer is always going to be money, but I don't see us working in that same way, and I think that's a problem. But that's something else. I mean, I'm at a certain age, I can't take on this new responsibility. I can only help support those who are doing it. But let me continue on this one. Thank you for those comments. And of course, like I said, this is the last program for this term. So if you have any other comments, please share them, because these are the kind of issues that we should be discussing as a community. Maybe that's what we're doing. Maybe one program, every 3 or 4, we just have a massive debate, like like a Zoom or something. Maybe, we'll think about something like that, But I don't want it to be entertainment. This program was never meant to be entertainment. It's a news digest. It tells us what's going on, so we can't pretend we don't know what's going on. And that, like 10 years from now, 50 years from now, when people are saying that what was going on, and they read the newspapers and it looks like we're okay, they can actually see somewhere else and not about our people, and that actually no, this has been going on for years, decades. Anyway, this story about I said this is the link you heard about Nigel Farage talking about the great replacement nonsense from Parliament, but from the floor we have GB News perpetrating this myth of white victimhood and this nonsense about anti-white two-tier policing. And if you just heard the story we've just been talking about, the idea that there's anti-white two-tier policing when it's actually us as African people in this country that face the brunt of what they call two-tier policing is not just annoying, it's also insulting. But this white victimhood charge is gaining currency. There were 1,000 people gathered after the release of the police body cam footage showing the last moments of Henry Nowak. And of course, it was horrific. I saw that it was horrific. He was a European 18-year-old student who was erroneously arrested and handcuffed over false racism claims while he was dying from stab wounds. Now, those wounds were inflicted on him by a Vikram Digwa, who was a Sikh. He had made the false racism allegations, and he's been jailed for murder. And but how, I mean, it's a complicated thing, right? The police heard that, he said he'd been attacked, that, he'd been racially assaulted. I saw the video, and from the moment the guy was on the floor saying, like, I've been stabbed, I can't breathe, they should have had a duty to care to him, and they didn't. And so I get it why people are angry. I was angry. But then what happened immediately afterwards was that those people came together and started saying, it's the Muslims, it's the Muslims. They did not differentiate by faith. They just went straight for Muslims. And then what happened in this particular case, it wasn't someone who's a Muslim, it was someone who's a Sikh. They don't know the difference between a Sikh, a Muslim, a Hindu. They haven't got a clue. It's racism. And this is what we need to understand in this country, that when they engage in these kind of rights and they give us excuses why, it's about immigration, it's about not learning our culture, it's about your language, it's got nothing to do with it. It's about racism. And so, in this particular case, when there was those uprisings in Belfast and people were kind of being evacuated from their homes by the police, the commentator Bev Turner, you can see on GB News on the screen below, she was telling her viewers that these were just little skirmishes, that there was no riot, there was no house being burnt down. I mean, we've seen the houses being burnt, and we've seen the footage of the houses being burnt down. But she was saying, well, no, 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 no. There were no masked men terrorizing people of minority backgrounds in the city. And this is part of the problem. You see, I mean, like I said, Abdul Latif Ajibika was 17-year-old when he was tasered by the police. That's two-tier policing. When he's left bleeding, bruised, and unable to leave the house because he's so traumatized. Okay, what Henry Nowak experienced was outrageously bad policing, and those officers should be brought to account. But to call that two-tier policing is completely distorting the facts, and trying to take someone who's a real victim and exploit their pain, their death for political aims. I'll move on. This section always makes me annoyed. But it's the last story for this section, white supremacy. It's so creative. Every time I think I've got it, it comes up with something new. Okay, so here's a new story in the Jewish Chronicle. Please sit down, because you won't believe me when I tell you what it is. Okay, so there's a new project being launched, and you might be thinking, oh, I see the word Windrush in this. Oh, fantastic. It's a new project. And in this project, the anchor of the Empire Windrush is set to be raised from the sea for a memorial project commemorating the ship's link to both the African Caribbean and Jewish experience. You heard me right. The anchor of the Empire Windrush is going to be raised from the sea and then put into a memorial project which commemorates both the African Caribbean and Jewish experience. Now, this project, which has been announced by the Windrush Anchor Memorial Foundation ahead of Windrush Day, which is taking place tomorrow, will seek to salvage the ship's original anchor from the Mediterranean off the Algerian coast, where it sank following a catastrophic fire in 1954. And then what will happen is that the recovered artifact is going to be a centerpiece of a permanent public memorial in London, accompanied by a nationwide program of education, community engagement, and cultural storytelling. Now, I love museums. I love cultural heritage. This is my thing, right? This is the thing I kind of do. But some of you will know, I hate this term, the way Windrush is being used to narrow our story. I think Professor Gus John uses the term the wintrification of our history, where everyone from the Caribbean comes from Jamaica, where no one was in the UK before 1945 when they came on the SS Windrush, where the SS Empire Windrush is a ship of mythos. It's a great narrative where we should be proud. We should have Windrush stamped on our chests, all of us, rather than recognizing that this was a Nazi ship and that we shouldn't be using the names and the idea. It was called something. It was called Monte Rosa beforehand in the Second World War, before it was requisitioned by the Nazi regime. But it's not our name. It's not our ship. It's not our history. And now, in what some people are calling the Windrush industry, there's kind of like where everything to do with Windrush is being branded and sold and recommodified. What's happening now is that there's this massive campaign, and we're finding out in November 1942, the vessel was used for the deportation of 46 Norwegian Jewish people who were transported from Oslo and ultimately sent to Auschwitz, where all but 2 of them were murdered. Now, do I think that history should be commemorated? Hell yes. Do I think that this is something that people should learn about? Definitely. Do I think that conflating Windrush with the history of African people from the Caribbean is a wise thing to do? No. Do I think that pretending that Windrush is now a safe, like a appropriate term to refer to not just African history but also Jewish history, and that we should help raise approximately £2 million to fund this recovery operation? I'm going to leave that up to you. But this is what happens. I had this argument, well, not argument, I had this discussion with the Grenfell families way back, kind of like in the weeks, maybe months following the atrocity. I can't share too much information, but I sat down with some of the family members and some of the community, and I asked my expertise on certain issues. And one of the things I remember that was being pushed really fast was, let's get the station renamed Grenfell Station. Let's rename everything Grenfell. And like, that's a way to remember things, to commemorate everything. And they asked, Toyin, what do you think? What do you think? I said, I'm an East Londoner. I'm here to support. But what do you think? I can see your face. I said, well, I don't know what my face is showing. I said, well, you've got a view on this. I said, well, Grenfell, do you know where the name Grenfell comes from? Because Grenfell is a name of a European British commander, who's engaged in colonialism, right? So why would you name yourself after him? Why would you put a symbol and commemorate him? And it's the same thing like Empire Windrush. The two names should, the Empire, SS Empire Windrush. It's a massive red flag, and yet we don't seem to get it. Anyway, I'm just sharing the stuff. This is me. Maybe I'm a bit too sensitive, and I'm going to move on. That's my head in. Okay, you're watching the Games Pan-African Community News Update. Interact. Facebook, YouTube, subscribe, like, share. Yeah, this is world news relating to our community over the past 2 weeks. Chat's still active. Sister Oleander still with us. Let me get going. It's nice to have some world news. We've been a bit low on world news. We've had so much dealing with what's just happening in the UK that we've been a bit short on this. We've got a few stories for this week. So let me get started on this one. The first one is that the Democratic Republic of Congo is upping its efforts to regain access to a trove of historical geological records stored in Brussels Museum. And this is in a bid to celebrate the discovery of new critical mineral deposits in the country. Now, at first, this sounds interesting, right? Historic information, Brussels Museums, we kind of want that. And the Congolese Minister of the Mines, Louis Watam Kabamba, you can see in the image, met Belgium and EU officials to discuss the digitalization of millions of records being held in the Royal Museum for Central Africa, which is in Belgium, which are the center of the dispute between the institution and a US minerals and artificial intelligence startup. And this is now where the story gets interested, because the Bill Gates-backed Cobalt Metals struck a deal last year with Kinshasa to digitize the papers, but has yet to access them, while the museum plans to handle the process itself and give copies to Congolese authorities. And why this is a problem, or why I perceive as a problem, some people say a problem, is that this is not a heritage issue that is being discussed here. It seems like it, no. I said at the beginning, this is looking at geological records of the Congo. What's happening is that we're seeing a fight over access to maps that will show where the resources of minerals in Congo might exist. And it demonstrates that accelerated race of resources as countries worldwide seek to reduce their dependency on China for a broad array of critical minerals means that Africa's back in the fray. This is now an AI kind of scramble for Africa. And so these historical records should come to the Congolese government, even though I'm not the greatest fan of them using the same thing to find minerals and then to get caught up in the capitalist endeavor. But if I had to choose between a US company doing it or a Congolese government doing it, of course, I'm going to be more in favor of the Congolese government doing it. The next story is one about football. Those of you know of my in-depth knowledge of football or not. The World Cup is now with us. And the Times newspaper is another one of those right-wing papers who decided to attack the diversity of World Cup 2026 due to there being, at least 1,248 competing players born outside of the country that they've chosen to represent. Now, instead of seeing this as like a positive thing that the world is clearly interconnected, that these cultural exchanges take place all the time. Papers like the Times kind of like sees this as an immigrant World Cup. That's how they're trying to brand it, in the World Immigrant Cup, and this is a pejorative thing here. But what I also wanted to focus on was that because the US is hosting and doing this, it's like you can also see that they're exploiting this for the maximum. So the US recommends that World Cup fans who want to travel pay for a visa, which is around £137, and that applicants must attend an in-person interview. The State Department says that they must demonstrate their intent to depart the United States after their trip and their ability to pay all costs on the trip. And of course, if you're familiar with what's going on with ICE, you'll understand how this is tied up into this racist rhetoric from the Orange One in the White House. And in May, the US announced it would drop the requirement for deposits of up to £11,000 for people from World Cup qualifying countries, provided they have valid World Cup tickets. And I hadn't even been aware that if you wanted to go to see the World Cup, you had to have 11,000 or make put £11,000 deposit. That's absolutely outrageous. They've dropped it now. That was last month. But I don't know if you knew, but I knew that. The countries we're talking about are countries like Algeria, Cape Verde, Ivory Coast, Senegal, Tunisia. Imagine that. Some football fans do have £11,000 just sitting in their bank account, which they can give to the American government as a deposit. But yeah, the World Cup, the gift that keeps on not giving. Okay. What else? Okay, we're going to talk about climate coloniality. You're thinking, Toyin, what? 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 Well, this is an interesting article that was shared with us, and it's written by the organisation, or Samoa, I think that's how you pronounce it, who went to Jamaica to understand what comes after the emergency. And they kind of like thought, okay, 6 months have passed since Hurricane Melissa left a trail of destruction. How come disaster is yet to end? We're not hearing much about it, but how come people think that life continues and reconstruction is possible? But what else is going on? Especially when we know there's going to be more intense new hurricanes on the horizon. Well, they say that thousands of islanders face continued devastation with food insecurity, forced relocation, closed schools, and houses without roofs. You've got to remember, Melissa, which struck in October 2025, was the most powerful hurricane on record in Jamaica, and it left 45 people dead. It then moved on to Cuba, where nearly 735,000 people were evacuated and passed through the Bahamas region. Now, the impact of the climate event vary among the islands, and this reveals distinct histories, economic structures, and governmental capabilities. The domino effect exposes the fragilities in political responses and in processes to adapt to the climate and recover after disaster. And when we talk about the domino effect, when we talk about those distinct histories, we talk about the legacies of enslavement, the legacy of coloniality. And this is really what we call climate coloniality, reproducing legacy of colonization and imperialism in this manner. Now, devastation wrought by the hurricane is prolonged by how reconstruction is organized and financed. And it's precisely there that the cycle deepens. There's a quote I found in the article: there is concern about the next hurricane season, while at the same time dealing with day-to-day needs, food to eat, water to drink, trying to offer children some sort of entertainment or educational engagement since they're already out of school. And what we know is that market shelves were stocked with emergency products, and there was a lack of fresh food. This impression is backed by data from the World Food Programme. Insufficient food consumption affected 30% of the households, monitored 1 month after the hurricane. 4 months later, it was 12%, but this is nearly twice the pre-Melissa level of 7%. And diet quality has also continued to be compromised, with 1/3 of households not eating any fruit in the last week, while access to dairy was slowly recovering. The point here is that it's been 6 months since Hurricane Melissa, and everyone thinks it's all over, but it's not. We move on, new stories come on the agenda, but the devastation that was wrought by that phenomena, and bearing in mind that we know that another set of hurricanes will come by, is causing havoc. And this is, unless this is dealt with at an institutional level, this is dealt with addressing the coloniality which has been set up through, not I'd say decades, but centuries of exploitation, of extraction, then people never recover. It's just an interesting article, and I just thought I'd share some of the points from it. This is an irritating one, like many. Nigeria has become the latest African state to repatriate some of its citizens from South Africa, following a rise in anti-migrant sentiments in the country. Now, many of you will know that across Azania, I say Azania, sometimes you'll hear me say Azania, sometimes you hear me say South Africa. Azania is the indigenous term for what they call South Africa. There has been an explosion of xenophobia with, and this is one of the downsides of anti-immigration rhetoric spreading in the way it does from Europe, from Americas, all over the world. Because then what happens is that after a week, political actors take it on board and use the same rhetoric, the same images to try and seize political power. So the things that we see happening in the UK get replicated in other countries, which should know better. But in this particular case, Nigeria had to send a flight which carried 268 people from Nigeria who landed in Lagos. They're part of 1,000 people who the Nigerian consulate in South Africa said registered to be repatriated. It's not just Nigeria. Ghana, Zimbabwe, Malawi have also carried out evacuations. And this is often because they're doing it now because there's a deadline made for the 30th of June, which is set where the government has said that undocumented migrants have to leave. So, like I said, these different nations are happening. Nigeria was 268, Malawi was 171. This is going on continuously while we're here. We're not hearing much about it here in the West, but it's just taking place in the motherland. We're seeing xenophobia with Africans attacking African people. And this is the antithesis of Pan-Africanism. It's the complete opposite of what it is. A number of Ghanaians were being treated in hospitals in Tanzania after being attacked. The government is said to have asked South Africa to compensate the Ghanaians who've been repatriated for the property that they had to leave behind. I have some quotes from some of the people there. They're saying you can't even walk around freely. You'll be scared. The children are scared. Recently, they attacked me in a taxi. I ran away and left my things. I left my phone and everything. They call us names and say, you must leave this country. When we tried to beg them, they started insulting us. This is what's taking place in Tanzania. So this anti-immigration rhetoric isn't just limited to the EU and the US and the UK. It's now spreading everywhere. It's really important to remember that. Horrible story, absolutely horrible. I say the US, and let's go back to the source of much of this mess. The UK and the US are often the source of this kind of rhetoric. A medical examiner has ruled the death of the Haitian asylum seeker, Daphne Michel, who you can see on the screen, after being released from federal custody, a homicide. Now, many of us in the UK won't be familiar with this story, but an attorney representing, or not say attorney, a solicitor representing her family, said he expects her relatives to sue the Immigration and Customs Enforcement, ICE, in connection with her death. And in the UK, a lot of the news has gone quiet on ICE. It was very turbocharged when it was new, but what happens in the West, specifically in the UK, is that they tend not to focus on those kind of things after a few months, and they move on to the next news story, even if things are still going on. And especially if things are going on and they're affecting African people disproportionately, there's less interest in the story. And so we're here, we have less awareness of kind of like what's happening. And in this particular case, Daphne Michel, who's 31 years of age, passed away. And I said passed away, she died on the 2nd of March. She was found in a bus shelter in Pittsburgh. Now, the county medical examiner's office found that her cause of death was to be hypothermia and ruled the manner a homicide. And they indicated that the death was caused by the actions of another individual, although they did say it shouldn't be interpreted as a declaration of criminal guilt. And that's really interesting. So they might be saying it might be negligence. They might be saying it, I'm not going to try and speculate. They're saying it shouldn't be interpreted necessarily as criminal guilt, but they're saying that she would be alive had not for the actions of someone else. And this is why the family is expected to sue ICE, because our sister was a native of Haiti who was seeking asylum in the US. She arrived in 2022. She was granted humanitarian parole based on urgent humanitarian need, but she did not live to see a hearing scheduled for 2 weeks after she died. Excuse me. The medical examiner's office said that she was a vulnerable adult suffering from untreated severe mental health issues and a significant language barrier. It's a horrific story. I'm glad that the inquest has actually started to kick up some of the facts. Again, this is not going to bring her back, but if we can make, or if her family can make the state responsible for that, that will be some kind of progress. I started with a libation to Walter Rodney. I'll go through the story and you can determine what you think about it. Now, Jamaica is in discussion with the United States to accept what they call third country deportees. And this is a move that would see the island nation add to a list of Caribbean countries working with the Orange Ones administration on its immigration agenda. Now, I just read the last story about our Sister Michelle. So what's happening here is that Jamaica's National Security Minister, Dr. Horace Chang, confirmed that the country has signed a memorandum of understanding with the US Department of Homeland Security to accept at least 25 people from countries other than Jamaica every 2 weeks. That means that America could just dump. I don't like using the word dump when we're talking about human beings. That's how they see it. It's not how I see it. But they can deport people to Jamaica every 2 weeks, just like that. The deportees, said Chang, will not be placed in detention, but details of where they would be housed has yet to be determined. And that's quite good to know on that level. Compensation for accepting them is still being hashed out. So it looks like this is a financial deal. Now, if the agreement is finalized, Jamaica would join Mexico, El Salvador, Uganda, and a number of other countries that have agreed to accept what they call third country migrants deported from the US. Now, in Jamaica, there's already pushback against this, but even that narrative is a little bit uncomfortable because the PNP, which is the Opposition People's National Party, are saying that accepting the migrants places Jamaica's internal security, international standing, and fragile social infrastructure at severe risk. So the argument they're using is that having more people coming to Jamaica from America who've just been sent to us is kind of like it's a threat to ourselves as a nation. And that's the wrong argument as far as I'm concerned. The argument is not about that. The argument is about the ethics of this, that we should not be supporting that deportation, that these people are somehow illegal because America says so. And that Jamaica is joining in with this scheme makes me very uncomfortable. In fact, it makes me quite annoyed. But what does it mean that I'm annoyed? So I'm not Thanos. And the last story for this section is one about an article which talks about reclaiming Jamaica's coastline and explains how beach rights are land rights and how the coastline has slowly shifted from a sheer space to one that is increasingly restricted. Now, I've seen this take place, this phenomena, in St. Lucia, I've seen it in Barbados, and of course, this article is looking at Jamaica, which I just spoke about. And one of the good things is that activists are challenging colonial laws and demanding that free, legal, unfettered, forever rights to use the beaches are extended to all people there in Jamaica. Now, these concerns about beach access are not new. Jamaicans have been raising this from as far as the 1950s. In response, the Beach Control Act was introduced in 1956, and this gave the government control over the seabed, the foreshore, but access often depended on licenses, special permissions, or long-standing use by communities such as fishers. It wasn't this kind of like sense that, hold on, this is everyone's space, that, beach is for all of us. And at the same time, exclusive licenses are also given to private developers and businesses. And I've seen that. That's the era I came in when I saw that there were certain places like Sandals that had their own little beaches and local residents couldn't use those spaces. Now, 70 years later, many Jamaicans still do not have a clear right to access the coastline. It's their own home and they can't access it. Instead, public access has continued to shrink as tourism development, private projects, and competing use of coastal land have expanded. In fact, in 2020, there was a draft beach access and management policy for Jamaica, which was shared with the public and some consultations were held. But it was not until this year in March that Prime Minister Andrew Holness announced that a tabling of the final beach access and management policy would actually be enacted. And this is the latest attempt to reconcile public expectations with private development interests and environmental protection. Now, this is a step forward, and I had to give him credit to that. But while the policy affirms the importance of public access in principle, it stops short of clearly guaranteeing Jamaicans the right to freely access the country's coastline. And so, we should keep an eye on this because this isn't new and isn't unique just to Jamaica. This goes all across the Caribbean, where African people who have lived on the islands for generations are being told that certain parts of the island, of their homes, are not for them to walk upon. And tourists, people who actually are colonialists, some of them who are just straight out racist, can go with unfettered access and be protected by the state while doing so. Now, the article I've mentioned is written by Teresa Rodriguez Moody, who's an environmental scientist and chief executive officer of the Jamaica Environment Trust, and Diana McCauley, who's the founder of Jamaica Environment Trust, and you can find it online. Wow, okay, so that's the last one for that section, and this is the final section for this week's program. So just as a heads up again, you are watching the Daily Pan-African Community News Update. If you are still live with us, if I haven't bored you to smithereens, you're welcome to interact with us through Facebook or YouTube. As I say, don't forget to subscribe, because we're not going to be on for a few months, and so you'll probably get an alert when we come back on. Sorry that we started late, so this is running late. But even though with the sun, well, the sun's going down now, but it's hard to differentiate between night and daytime. You can like and share if you find the broadcast useful. But this closing section looks at some of the positive news relating to our community over the past couple of weeks. And yes, just Oleander's on chat, so if you have something to say or even talk to each other, please do so. This is the last opportunity for that. Right, okay, and so I'm going to start off with a topic we've been kind of like hinting towards that's been happening over the last week. There was a conference that took place in Ghana, and a global framework for reparatory justice has now been adopted. And it was attended by leaders from Africa and the Caribbean, and they've demanded formal apologies from countries that benefited from Ma'afa. I use the term Ma'afa as opposed to the so-called transatlantic slave trade. It's a horrendous term, but that's what's happened. Heads of states and governments and other officials formally approved the strategy at a gathering in a hotel in the capital, Accra, which was the first major meeting since the adoption of the landmark United Nations resolution declaring the trafficking of enslaved Africans as the greatest or the gravest crime against humanity. Now, the document that they've signed lays out a 19-point global framework for reparative justice. They include a call for all state and non-state institutions yet to do so to offer full, formal and unconditional apologies as a foundational step towards reconciliation, trust building and reparative justice. It also includes resolving to ensure fair and adequate compensation for Africans and people of African heritage affected by legacies of enslavement, colonialism, genocide, and apartheid, and to expedite the return of cultural property, human remains, archives, and heritage to their countries of origin. And the framework also calls for multilateral measures to address sovereign debt burdens, including debt relief, and to tackle lasting socioeconomic impacts of enslavement, colonialism, and related historical injustices. Some of this might sound familiar to you, like drop the debt kind of stuff. We've been here before. Make poverty history. I think that was the name of the campaign. But this is a good, initiative, and people are agreeing on this. The adoption came on the last day of a 3-day conference, Build Next Steps, that also resulted in the establishment of a 3 global panels on reparative justice and restitution. On top of that, Barbados Prime Minister announced an updated document, and I'm talking about the what they call it, the 10-stop plan, reparative plan that the CARICOM had come up. This time, she's included an emphasis on the harm done to African women, and that's now being considered by other African Caribbean countries. And in Ghana, in the same conference, also secured commitments from several European countries to return looted cultural artifacts and support efforts towards reparatory justice, with the Netherlands announcing a plan to return 2,000 artifacts catalogued in its possession. So this is kind of like a 3-day conference. A lot of heads of states and leaders coming around working on the next steps. I'm going to leave it there. Some of you know me very well, so I won't make my comments. But let's take the win, and let's hope let's hope that things move in a direction that everyone is talking about. Talking about hope, this is the positive news section, so I'm not going to say much about this, but there's been a lot of doom and gloom in this week's broadcast. But what I should also say, what put a smile on my face for like at least half a second, was that there were thousands of people who attended anti-racism rallies across the UK. And you can see some of the images of the thousands of anti-racism campaigners who filled Glasgow's Buchanan Street, while others attended marches and demonstrations across Belfast. So even though there was this extreme violence taking place, it's always worth remembering as well that there are people, with a good heart and a good mind who stand up. And I think one of the clips I saw in the news that I really, really resonated with me. It was a couple of Europeans, young women, saying, "Look, it's like this violence, is so ugly. It's not who we are, but we don't want to see people from minority ethnic backgrounds on the street facing this violence. We'll put our bodies on the line. It's like, they need to be kept safe. We'll confront these thugs." And I found that really quite beautiful. I found that this understanding that actually some of those thugs, some of those racists out there are your brothers, your uncles, your aunts, your uncles, your mothers, your fathers, your sons, your daughters, and deal with them. And they did. I mean, of course, there was a bit too many, stand up to racism flyers out there, but it was nice to see this expression of unity against the pogroms and the racism that's been running up and down the United Kingdom for the last couple of days. And I suspect with the heat, it's going to get worse. Okay, the next good news story is I found this really refreshing as someone who is a walker who loves to go on treks or bike rides. This is a story of Leanne Wharton, who started a hiking committee for people from different minority ethnic backgrounds to encourage greater confidence going outdoors. And it sounds really basic, right? But I've just been telling you about some of the problems, some of the violence that's been meted out on the streets. Glasgow, some guy just stabbing like Muslims on the street, stabbing them. I mean, outside is not a safe space for us. And, even though those things are not, the norm, and, what did the Crime Watch used to say? The odds of you being involved in a crime and statistics are very low, blah, 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 blah. Well, those statistics are increasing, going against us. And so for her to found this organization, Soul Trail Wellbeing, which she did during the pandemic, I think it's a really good move. And she did this after reconnecting with walking in nature, because it helped her go through a difficult period with her mental health. She said that I failed to see people like me enjoying the outdoors. And so she just decided that, okay, well, there must be others like me. Now, the group, which is based in Bristol, runs regular hikes and wellbeing programs aimed at helping people feel more confident outside. If this was in London, I would have probably joined. I love going on a long walk, especially when they've got water features and stuff like that. But, on a bigger up. And those of you as well who feel the same way, sometimes, it's just, if you've got a couple of neighbours, people nearby you, sometimes just go for a walk near a park, near a stream, if you're able to, and just disconnect. I mean, our sister Leanne, who lives in Bristol, like I said getting outside became a complete solace when pressures at work and the restriction of lockdown began to take their toll. She said there were many barriers stopping people from racialized communities from enjoying the outdoors, and this is just her way of giving back. So I think this is positive news. It's also a reminder that there's something we can do. Of course, the political organisation has to be done. Of course, the hard work of defence, our children learning martial arts. There's loads of things that we have to do, economic empowerment, but also our well-being. It's a really important aspect of who we are and staying safe. This story is about the Marcus Garvey Ballroom, which is part of the historic Marcus Garvey Centre in Lenton, Nottingham, which closed in December 2024 due to health and safety fears. Well, the good news is that they've reopened 18 months afterwards. They worked together tirelessly to raise £50,000 to complete all the renovations and upgrades, and they've done it. It's a Grade 2 listed building. It was originally built for the Valley Bicycle Company. It was sold to the City Council in the 1980s. It became a community centre providing daycare services for the elderly, and its 600-person capacity ballroom hosts music and events. So it's a real kind of like cultural spot inside the city. The building at the rear became home for the Lenton Business Centre, which is home to around 70 local firms. But the problems over fire safety led to the facilities being shut down at short notice, and the organisers were left waiting for promises of remedial work to be fulfilled. It wasn't happening. And so they just said, okay, look, we can't be dependent on the council. We need our building back. This is part of us. This is the hub of the community. And so they raised over £50,000. Now, the council made some statements about how good this is. I'm not going to read the statements out because I actually still kind of like take umbrage with the fact that the community had to raise that money by themselves to do the work. But it did do the work, and it's reopened. And massive credit to John Taylor, one of the guys in the image that you can see. He said, we decided no longer to want to be dependent on the council and would do it ourselves. And that's what they did. And that's literally Garveyism. That's exactly what Garvey spoke about. Okay. All right, the penultimate story. This is one about Michaela Mensah. She's a Cambridge University graduate from a council estate in Brixton, London. And she said that she feels like she's living a dream after being offered a place at Harvard University. Big yourself up, Michaela. She's 22 years of age. She's the oldest of 4 sisters and was raised by her mother, a mental health assistant, and her dad, a London bus driver. She set up a fundraiser to raise £80,000 for her tuition and other expenses. And her journey to brilliance really started when the head of her sixth form at Oasis Academy South Bank said, well, why not you? If you want to go to Oxbridge, why shouldn't you? Why not you? And she said, she was speechless by this and thought he was joking. But she thought, you know what? I feel like when you're from certain areas, you subconsciously put limitations on yourself, which is what I think I was doing, even though I knew I was intelligent. So it never crossed my mind I would apply to Cambridge. So now she has, and she's aspiring to scale educational initiatives to support young people to dream big and unlock their potential. So she wants to give back. So she finished sixth form, gone to Cambridge, and now she's going to Harvard. It's amazing. She said that some young talented people never get to realize these certain opportunities exist because of their environment. And I just think it's really powerful that, we have a young 22-year-old who's doing all this hard work and it's seen the barriers and kind of limit aspirations, and actually said, you know what, it just takes someone to say, well, why not you? For her to say, you know what, why not me? And just go out and do it. And I'm not saying that university is for everyone, because it certainly isn't. I know that when I was a young person, when I was at school, the idea of going to university never crossed my mind. No one I went to a school called Woodbury Down and in North London, and no one encouraged me to think about going into higher education. It's odd that now I'm at University College London, I'm a lecturer there, but it wasn't something that was on my radar. And she's right, you unconsciously put limitations on yourself and you don't realize that you have the space. And people recognize I was intelligent, but you don't think those spaces are for you. Well, you know what, those spaces are for any of us that dream to do and to be bigger and to explore our potential. I still resent the fact that what happened there? That's strange. Sorry about that. I still resent the fact that she had to raise £80,000 for a fundraiser for her tuition. There's still something rotten in the system that says that you have to do that. These kind of things that we've paid so much money in our blood and sweat, let alone our taxes, that there should be enough bursaries and schemes for those of us who are willing to do the work and really want to live that dream to go through. But I want to bigger up. Wow, and I think that is the last story. Oh, I said that's the penultimate, didn't I? This is the last story, and this is one. It's a shameless plug. Also, I'll label free from me. So this is the last program for a little while, but I'm going to be involved in a couple of events over the next few days. And I'm kind of crap at promoting stuff. And so, I'll put them all together on a slide. I'm learning. I'm still not good at it. But I will say that on the 23rd of June, that's this week coming, there's going to be the inaugural lecture for Professor Gus John at the Montfort University. It's taking place between 5 and 8. And the first inaugural guest lecturer is going to be my beloved sister, Dr. Emma Biney. Now, I'm just gassed Is that how the young people say it? Gassed? I'm just gassed to be included on the panel for the discussion. It's going to be chaired by Henry Bonsu. Of course, our guest of honor, Professor Gus John's going to be there. And, we're going to be discussing, the state of play right now. I mean, that's the situation. So if you are, able to travel, that's one place that you're welcome to attend. You can find this on Eventbrite, but that's not in London. So where is it? Montfort University. Is it Nottingham? I'm quite kind of rubbish geographically. But if you are based in London, we have the last program for the Regenerative Community Workshop, which is part of the Light Echoes and Libraries series, which talks about moving images of global knowledge, justice. This has been a fantastic series of events. I mean, I love libraries, I'm a nerd, but this was really an event for librarians and people involved in libraries and archives and moving things forward. And we've had filmmakers from across the continent come to the UK talking about the work they're doing back in Uganda. We've had archivists here working in the UK talking about the challenges. And I'm going to be convening this with Alice, this regenerative community workshop for those who have actually been to the events. And we're just going to sit and talk and discuss what next, what can we do? Because in every sector, you kind of find out that people are going through, especially if you're from minority ethnic communities, similar struggles. The first film that we showed was basically kind of an expose of the challenges faced by African American librarians and the work that they're having to do, and they have done, to get themselves recognized and to make sure that they are they progress in a sector. And those struggles exist here in the UK. I didn't even know the struggles that existed. So for me, it's been very humbling listening to some of these trailblazers who have set the scene and done so much work behind closed doors for us, and just being able to support them and in that way is something I'm looking forward to. And then the final event is in a couple of weeks' time. It's the 3rd of July at the Barbican. I think I spoke about this in our last program, and this is a listening session called Generations of Pan-Africa, which is a discussion which I'm going to have, an intergenerational discussion with my son, Shano, or Nate, as he goes by, about street soul, about Pan-Africanism. I went to the Barbican exhibition a couple of days ago, and my gosh, it was amazing. They have an exhibition on Pan-Africanism, and I'm really honest with you, I was very skeptical, and they did a fantastic job. And I'm not just saying that because I'm doing this listening session here. I'm doing it because it was about culture and art of Pan-Africanism, and I thought it was going to be very clear, but they would miss over most of the core facts, but they didn't. Whoever did it really, I have to say, love our people. They have an understanding. They didn't shy away from difficult conversations. If you, I should have had the dates in front of me about how long it's running for, but if you have a chance, check it out. It's a really good exhibition. It's really odd for me to say this because the last time I was at the Barbican for anything was that I remember quite strongly was the protests against Exhibit B. They were doing the complete opposite of Pan-Africanism. They were engaging in extremely racist exhibitions against our community, and they had that colonialist, that white supremacist Brett Bailey, who had put together the exhibition, and also our sister Sarah, who had led the charge to kind of like shut it down. And I remember being, in fact, my master's dissertation is actually on that protest, is actually on that movement. And so it's nice to see exactly 10 years later that there's a next generation of young people from our community who are actually creating something with such a plum. There was an event I just went to there, part of the Pan-African season, called Emmy Freedom Song. It's a beautiful expression of love. It moves from despair to love. The brothers who were engaged, the sisters who were singing it, were recently at one of the events that I arranged for this, or co-arranged for this Lights, Echoes and Libraries series. But anyway, I'm going on and on and on and on and on. I'm going to shut up now because my voice is going. Those are 3 events that if you're interested in, check them out. I would love to see you at the listening session, even though I'll probably cringe. talking about my work of musics. But yeah, there we go. Okay. I'm not good at self-promotion. I'm very not good at self-promotion. It's just Oleander. That's strange. The slide's gone in. Oh my God. Hello, everyone. Jazz hands.
Yeah, I don't know.
Okay.
Yes, just a couple. Can you hear me?
The sound's gone. Oh, it's just me, I think.
Oh,
Yeah, it's just
can
me.
you hear me?
I can hear you.
Okay. All right. So,
Okay.
okay, great. So just a couple of comments at the end. Emma8162 says, thanks for all the work you do. I like the idea of staying up for the solstice. Having a Zoom meeting on how we organize to defend ourselves is a very good idea. And then the last comment,
you see, I don't know if you're frozen for me or.
She wants to encourage others to achieve.
Okay, I've got the tail end of that. You froze for a second from my side. I don't know if that was everyone else. But you're talking about our sister who's going to Harvard, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, it is.
Oh, yeah. Okay. Well, that's cool. Let me just put the slide back on for 1 second, see if I can bring us both back on. So, we get technical gremlins right at the end. Oh, there we go. Okay, as ever, I don't ever want to close the program, you see, without giving thanks to everyone who's involved in helping out. And that's our sister Angie, brother Colin, sister Anna, you know, for the research, and others who sent stories in. Those of you who checked in on me, I am doing better. Thank you. Not 100%. Just in case some of you are wondering, I don't really share my personal business. I did have an incident on the road with my bike. I almost wasn't here. The bike's been repaired. It was damaged. The bike's been repaired, and I'm back. You know, I got it back a couple of days ago, and yeah, and you know, we're still navigating the world as it is. You know, yeah, I don't know what else to say. I hate all this sort of stuff. But I just want to say, you know, those of you who've been with us and watching the program now, even though we're running late, thank you very much. Thank you for your support. I know we've gone on a little bit of time. It's just a little bit longer than we'd normally go for. While we're away, please don't forget we've got some amazing journalists doing some excellent work. They have their own blogs that you can also check out on as well. There's also people using is it Substack as well. And like, so I mean, you know, there's presenters. There's a new like a network for journalists that's been launched. So you can always keep up in touch. Yeah, we'll be back Sunday, the 4th of October, which is the new term, the new academic year. Sister Oleander, is there anything you want to say before we wrap off?
No, just be careful out there with what Brother Toyin was saying earlier about how it is outside. You know, I know people that were planning to travel to Belfast, and I spoke to you about it, didn't I? And you said no, tell them don't go, because you know the reality is they'll look at us, they won't know whether we were born here or not, and in fact they don't care. So you know, and Barrage, if people believe him after that poster he had where there was a they were walking out of, I can't remember where they were walking from, but essentially he was saying that there's going to be millions of people coming into our country. It's just nonsense. So if people choose to believe him, that's their business. Anyway, but yes, stay safe out there. It's going to be very hot this week as well. So please be careful, stay hydrated. But enjoy the sun, kid.
Excellent. Yeah, I think the poster was called Breaking Point. I mean, people who any doubt about the racist agenda of reform or restore Britain or whatever they want, the conservative, whatever they want to call themselves, they're all the same, all white supremacist organizations. And even with this new, change in Labour, if Andy Burnham takes over, there's no guarantee. I would tell everyone to keep your expectations low. It'll be a change, but they don't have our back, and we have to organise. There's no other way around that. But anyway, if you make it to the listening session, we can sit down, we can chat, we can reason. I'm going to make the space so we can discuss music as well as discuss, organisation as well. I mean, it should be a blast. I have no idea what's going to happen. But I thank you for being with us now. Please have a safe summer. Enjoy the summer. Look after yourself. Be good to yourself. Be kind to yourself. Watch your back. Spend time with your loved ones. And may the ancestors continue to watch over us and guide and protect us. Ashe.
Ashe.